Creating, recording, and releasing a song in just 1 month is a bit of a challenge, but around these traps, we do it each and every year. It's called Songtember, and we have just completed it for 2023. Hello, my name is Pete Johns. Welcome to the Studio Live Today podcast. In this week's show, I'm taking you through my Songtember 2023 song I created, recorded, mixed, mastered, and then released it using Logic Pro on iPad. If you're listening to the audio version, you'll still get plenty of value out of this because I'll be talking through the process and taking you through all of this. But if you want to check out the video version, head on over to studiolivetoday.com. That's where you can find all the videos. And in fact, if you want to subscribe to this very podcast, all you need to do is go to studiolivetoday.com/podcast. Let's dive into it. So what we're going to do here is take you through the process, the original songwriting process, take you through track by track in Logic Pro for iPad, and then we're cleaning everything up and finishing this because here's the thing, if you are a patron over at studiolivetoday.com/Patreon, you get this project. You get all the stems, you get the entire project in Logic Pro for iPad. So if you want to open it up, and you can even open this in Logic Pro on the Mac, you can play with it. You can unhide the hidden bits of my vocals and make me sound ridiculous and crazy. You can do what you want. It's your project. You can play with it. So every year I open up my Songtember song to everyone for you to play around with. But let's dive in and take a look and a listen to this. So the song I created is called Choices. Originally it was called Choices in Life. Friend of the show, friend of the channel, Jade Star said, Johns, you should just call it Choices. The simple things in life are often the best. I agreed, and we changed the name of the song to Choices, and that is what it's now called. And Jade Star actually created what is the first track here. But we're going to come back to this later because these are the drums. We're here on the video. You can see all these purple bits. These are the drums. They're in a sum stack in Logic Pro, which means that they all go together there. But they didn't come till later in the piece. So let's talk about some of the other tracks that started this, because what started the whole thing was a riff. It was a riff that I had, and I created this many months ago, but you know what? I borrow from old things, and even though Songtember is a create, record, release a song all in the month of September, I borrowed these from a previous month in my voice memos. If you don't use voice memos, by the way, if you've got an iPhone, if you've got an Android device, if you've got an iPad, if you've got, I don't know, a Nokia smartphone, if you've got anything that you can record audio, capture your ideas. I promise you, they will come back to not haunt you, but help you in the future. So capture your idea. So this is the riff that we had. So it's like 222575402. It's in drop D tuning, and it was just a cool little riff. It sounds a bit like a few things, but you know what? There are 12 semitones in the Western scale, so everything's going to sound like something. At least that's my excuse for plagiarizing things in the past. So we had that, and we played this riff, and I was like, we need to build something around this riff. And as we continued on, we came to like a bit where it did something a little bit different, and this is what we came up with there. And then it does this. Why do you care what they think of your choices in life? So for some reason, that just came into my head. I was like, why do you care what they think of your choices in life? And I love a bit of audio where you have that complete stop, where you go like this. And yes, I didn't even take out the little finger movements going on there in the audio, especially on the audio version, you'll be hearing those. So that was what we came with originally. And the way we recorded this is I tracked that, and then throughout the demo writing process, I'm like, we need a second guitar. So I tracked it again, and what you're hearing there is the left guitar and the right guitar. We put a bunch of different effects on here over time. So if we take a look at the left guitar first, it sounds like this. And I wanted a really crunchy kind of sound here. Again, if you're watching on the video version, you're seeing all the plugins. But again, don't fret, just become a patron and you'll be able to get access to all of this, especially if you're using Logic Pro on iPad. You'll be able to see all these, or Logic Pro on the Mac. You'll be able to see these. But what we have here is we've got a noise gate, we've got the vintage drive, the amp designer here using the British Blues combo, we've got a compressor, and we've got some EQ just giving it a little treble boost and also rolling off the bottom end there. I then went again and added a second guitar. This is the right guitar. If you're listening in stereo, you'll hear this over on the right. This one's a little different. I've again got the noise gate. I've got the squash compressor on here. I'm using the what am I using here in the amp designer? I'm using a large black panel combo, which I think is the Fender amp from memory. They can't call it the Fender amp, but you know what I mean. I've got some compression on here, and again with the EQ, I've really sort of pushed the top end on this one. That's why it sounds a little bit higher in the mix. So if we bring these both together now, you get this kind of action going on. You've got your right guitar. You know what? I'm actually looking at the wrong guitars here, aren't I? I'm looking at the center guitar. I was like, what's going on with this? Because that was the wrong guitar. Let's go back and do a little bit of that again, because we selected the wrong guitar. So we had the right effects on here for the right guitar, but then we selected the wrong one. So noise gate, squash, amp designer, yep. So all of that was correct. So this is our left and our right guitar. So let's do that again. The left guitar sounds like this. And when you bring the right guitar in, and I like the way those two guitars complement each other. Now, that center guitar that I accidentally brought in before is doing a different kind of feel here. And this came in later in the piece, but I'm going to talk about it now while I talk about the other guitars here. So this one has like the high drive. This has the small brown combo, which is like a tweed amp kind of vibe on that one. And this one has a little bit more nutty, crazy EQ, as you can see here. But if you can't see it, we've got a big cut down here in the low, and we got lots of high end on this one. Because originally it sounded too low end and it was competing with the bass. So our three guitars, our left, our right, and our center coming together sound like this. So the beauty part here is that here in Logic Pro for iPad, you got so many options here with your guitar amps. You can customize your amp simulators out the wazoo. Now, very early on, I also wanted to bring a bit of a bass sound to this. So let's come in here and explore the bass guitar a little bit, because to go with these cool guitars, we wanted a bass sound. And here with the bass, here in Logic Pro, we use the bass amp designer. So we use one of our presets here, and this is just a pretty standard kind of bass amp. We didn't do a lot of change around to this, but we do have some EQ to really bring out the bottom end of this bass. So this is the sound we got. So we've got that fuzzy bass sound. So the bass amp designer here, we wanted to have that real high gain. And if you're looking on the screen here, the gain's at 10. If you're on the audio version, you won't see that, but trust me, the gain is at 10 on this amplifier. So when you bring this in with all the guitar sounds, you get a sound that I think sounds pretty gosh darn cool. Yep, and it just, I don't know, I love these bass sounds these days that sit up the top. So many times I used to use my bass, I'd have it too low. And this was just begging for that to be high. I also used my fingers on the bass for the very first time in a very long time. So that was our bass and our guitar sound. The vocals and the lyrics. So the lyric writing for this song, go back to the previous videos. If you want to head to studiolivetoday.com/songtember, check out the playlist. We wrote these vocals live on the show, which I think is pretty cool. So you folks actually helped me decide what these vocals would be, but it took me a really long time to kind of get the vocal sound right in the mix here. So let's explore this a little bit. I'm going to solo this vocal and I'm going to bring this in here. So we have a compressor, we have some distortion on here, some tape delay, some Springbox reverb, and the EQ here. And all of these things work in harmony to bring this sound. So here's the sound.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why. Why do you care what they think of your choices in life?
So the reason that I brought all these in, let's listen to this again, but let's turn off everything. So this is the beauty part of using plugins here in Logic Pro is we can turn everything off. So if I turn off the compressor, the distortion, the tape delay, the Springbox reverb, and the channel EQ, now you'll still hear these going through my reverb and my delay buses, and we'll talk about those a little bit later, but take a listen to this.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
So the first thing that we need there is the compressor. So what the compressor does is it flattens, it'll increase the volume here and it will kind of flatten out the tops of that. So that'll do this.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
What is the distortion here for? Well, that sounds too clean to my ears. So the distortion here just rubs it in the dirt a little bit and does this.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
And what I did with the distortion here is I made sure that the tone of the distortion was up around 7,500 hertz, 7.5 kilohertz. So it was pushing it and giving it that kind of treble heavy boost, like that treble drive boost in the sound there. The tape delay. This is a 1/16 triplet tape delay, which I think actually works really well with this vocal sound.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
So that just adds that thickness because a 1/16 triplet is like it's really fast and it works really well for this particular song. The Springbox reverb here, this just gives it a little bit more depth.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
And finally, the channel EQ. All I've done here is dropped down the low end and boosted the high end so you can get.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
And that was about 3 minutes of explanation, and that took me about 3 hours to actually craft that. And again, if you want to see all the settings that I used here, studiolivetoday.com/Patreon, I also have a double of this vocal. So while that vocal is playing, I also have a low down double here.
People will say lots of things, but they just don't know why.
Using similar settings but without the distortion. So that's the main thing there. I don't distort my doubled vocal because I want that to be a bit cleaner just sitting underneath there. So that's the main vocal processing we used on the track. So we had, at this point, we had some bass, we had some guitars, we had some vocals. The drums were just terrible. I'm getting all choked up about these drums. So this is the drummer that I had originally. I was just using the stock standard drummer, the auto drummer here in Logic Pro. And look, I say it was terrible. It was serviceable. It was great as a metronome. And if I spent hours and hours and hours tweaking it, I would have made it sound okay. But it was this. So there's the intro. And even as we came further into the track, it was really just a metronome, right? Even in the full-on bit. So something needed to be done about these drums. They were great for tracking the recording to, and I highly recommend if you're recording in GarageBand or Logic Pro or any DAW, don't record to the metronome. The metronome's going to sound absolutely awful. For instance, the metronome here in Logic Pro, if we just solo a track here, it sounds like this. Is that going to give you what you want? Is that going to make you like rock out? No. You don't want that as your metronome. You want some drums. So the drummer served its purpose. However, we now have these drums. And these drums that came in from Jade Star, don't move it like that. Sorry, I just moved the drums here on the screen. Don't do that. But these were created by Jade Star and they work exceptionally well. And take a listen to these drums. Yeah, your auto drummer is generally not going to do that sort of work for you. Now, in terms of the processing, here's the thing. With virtual drums, I didn't do much. A virtual drum kit already has a lot of processing on there. So in terms of EQ, in terms of compression, I was a lazy mofo. I didn't do a whole lot on this one. But you can see here we've got all the different kit pieces. Jade had already mixed these at the right kind of levels for this track. And the only thing that I did, like you can see, there's already the compressor. If you're looking at the video version, there was already a compressor and the drum kit designer here. I adjusted some of the gain of the snare and the kick drum. That was about it. All the other kit pieces didn't really do a whole lot. And then what I did is here in the mixer in Logic Pro for iPad, you can actually send things through to buses. Now, I explain buses in other videos, but the short version is I've set up a reverb and I've set up a delay bus. And each track, you can then decide how much you want to send to each of those buses. And this is just a way of adding reverb and delay. And you can see that I have added a little bit of reverb to the entire drum track here, to the entire drum mix. I've also then added a little extra reverb and delay to the snare drum. I love a little bit of delay on my snare drum, and I love lots of reverb on my snare, and I wanted extra reverb. Now, if I wasn't lazy, I would have come in here and individually added the right amount of reverb to each kit piece until it sounded perfect. Because I'm a lazy man, I added one reverb bus to the overall drums, meaning even my kick drum has a little bit of reverb, but my snare has extra reverb and some delay on there. So that's why when these drums are soloed, they've got that kind of wet sound to them. And if we solo just this snare, for instance, it's got a little bit of extra reverb and some delay on it as well, just to really make it poke out of the mix in a good way. So that's what we did with the drums. Very simple. You're probably learning here that I'm a simple guy. When it comes to mixing, I don't spend a lot of time faffing about. I don't remove every breath of my vocals. I don't worry about if my kick drum's got a little bit of reverb on there. Because guess what? Your bass and your kick drum might have a bit of reverb if they're playing in a reverberating space, and we want to kind of make this sound live. We have some backing vocals here. So the backing vocals were treated in much the same way as the regular vocals: compression, distortion, delay. In fact, I'm pretty sure I borrowed. In fact, no, these are the secondary lead vocals. So these vocals down here, these ones here, are our secondary lead vocals. And the reason I have these on separate tracks is you can hear there that I've actually got a heap more of the delay and the reverb on these ones. So again, if we come in here and look at these, look at how much I've turned up the reverb and the delay on these compared to the original vocals. So the original vocals had a little bit on there, but when we come into this section of the song, it really kicks up a notch. So we add a whole bunch of delay and reverb so that we really get that kind of intense delay reverb sound. Let's take a listen to these in the mix. Now, what you're hearing there is that I've actually got someone joining me. This is Jade Starr. This is her vocals that came in here as well. And these, I didn't do a whole lot to because Jade recorded these for me because, let's be honest, I couldn't hit these notes with any great gusto, and Jade could. So she's got two versions here. I've just simply panned these left and right so that you'll be able to hear them on the left and the right, and they sound like this.
If you make it, they will break it.
Really cool. And all I've done here in terms of processing is just push these through a little bit of that reverb. In fact, quite a lot of that reverb bus. This is why I like Logic Pro for iPad. GarageBand iOS, you can do the same sort of thing with your master reverb and your master delay. I used to do that all the time. Here in Logic Pro, you just use your bus and you send a little bit of that through. So yeah, that was the main change there between our regular lead vocal that we had up here and then that vocal at the end. So yeah, it just gave it a little bit more reverb and that delay. We do have some backing vocals down here, so let's take a listen to our backing vocal. These started right at the start here with a little bit of this. And the only main difference here with my backing vocals is I've added a stereo spread plugin. So because this backing vocal is not panned left or right, it's right up the middle, I've actually added some stereo spread just to give it a little bit more width. And apart from that, it's just very reverberant, like this.
They will right do it to you.
Not particularly well pitched, but it did the job. So we have those there. And then we've got more backing vocals that happen here towards the end. So let's just explore these real quick. Here is this backing vocal. And then we have another backing vocal as well. Now, for those looking here on the video version, you can tell here that I haven't spent a lot of time with these. The thing about doing a song in a month is that sometimes you have to rinse and repeat. And all of these were my first take of these recordings. And isolated, do they sound fabulous? No. Are they good enough for rock and roll? You tell me. Now, I'm not saying go for mediocrity, but sometimes when you're just using backing vocals, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter as much as maybe you think it does. And I know, if you had more time, then spend more time. But in the sake of this one, I didn't have a lot of time. So very similar sort of processing on these tracks with the compressor, with the EQ, with a little tape delay. There's not a whole lot of difference in these, apart from this one. So the second vocal here, for whatever reason, I used a very different chain for this. I just have a stereo spread and the chroma verb to create a very ethereal vocal sound. Very distant to add to this one. So basically it's doing the same thing, but one's kind of up front, one's distant, and that creates that kind of middle space, far away space. So it adds some depth to the overall mix. The final thing we have in this mix is the organ. Yeah. So I've finished this song with an organ sound, and the Logic Pro, the default organ that we have in here, the vintage B3, sounds pretty gosh darn awesome. I didn't spend a lot of time customizing this. I tweaked a couple of the sounds in here, but didn't do a whole lot. And by itself, I think it sounds pretty epic. And again, any instrument in isolation is going to sound a bit weird and a bit wacky, but when you bring this back into the mix, here at the end, it just needed something. It needed a change up. And because this song was kind of inspired by the band Tool, in the album Anima, Tool use a really cool organ at the start of a song. I think it's Jimmy. Arnhem fans are going to correct me on that one, but I think it's Jimmy. And I just wanted a sound that finished off the track just like this. There you go. And you can hear there that there's a lot more delay on that vocal. And for those watching on the video version, I've actually got the reason I have two vocal tracks here, the main vocal track on track 17 for those playing along at home, and then this secondary track at the end is I've changed it up. I've added a heap of delay on this second track. So that's why you get this kind of sound at the end.
You're not the star of your own one-man show. You think you know more than I'll ever.
And all I've done there is I've really pushed up that 1/16th triplet. Wah, 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 ba, da, la, 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 la. I've really pushed that up there to really accentuate. And because it's a cool stereo delay sound that we have here, that's what creates that cool kind of echoing, sort of rotating, flanging almost sound there. So that is the mix that we have here. Now, the final things we can do here, we've got some old tracks down the bottom here that we don't need anymore. So we can delete these. But what I will do to create the final version of my track here, and again, apologies to those on the audio version, but all I'm doing is closing out of that. I'm going to tap and hold and duplicate on choices 17, and we now have choices 18, which is going to become the final mix because we don't need anything that we don't need. So we can delete out some old tracks, which we will do. You won't get copies of these because you won't need them. We'll delete out the old drummer because you won't need the old drummer track if you want to remix this or play around with this. And I'm going to delete the unseparated drums as well. If you want those in the future, reach out to me. I'm sure I can provide them. So what we have now is the final version. We have the drum sum, we have the bass, we then have the 3 guitar tracks. We have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 vocal tracks, including all of the backing vocals in there. We have the organ track, and we have the stereo out track. So with the drums all being summed up there, we actually have 28 tracks. But remember that 12 of those are drum tracks here in Logic Pro for iPad. So once again, if you would like all of this project, if you would like to play around with this, we have the markers, the time signatures, because we've got multiple time signatures in there as well. We've got all those summed up drums by Jade Starr as well. We have the bass track, all those guitars, all the vocals. If you want to do a remix or just see behind the curtain of how we do this, head over to the Patreon. Link down in the description or studiolivetoday.com/Patreon, and you can check all of this out. Let's finish by taking a listen to this complete track. I'm going to turn my volume down on my microphone and we're going to play this through, and we'll just take a little peek into this because this is going to be the final pin in the cushion. No. The fork in the eye. No. The ending of Songtember 2023. Thank you everyone for being here. Please be kind to yourself, be kind to others, keep creating, and don't forget studiolivetoday.com for all of your mobile creating needs. This is my Songtember song. This is Choices. I'll see you next time.
Choices in life. People your choices is.